"He is under arrest, Grandpa." He didn't say a word when they cuffed him. Just looked straight ahead, calm, quiet, as if none of it surprised him. In the courtroom, people whispered. A few chuckled. A juror rolled their eyes. To them, he seemed like just another bitter old man caught in the wrong fight. But what no one knew, not even the judge, was that the man in chains had once ended a war with a single shot. And the only witness who knew the truth wore 4 stars on his shoulder and was already on his way to the courthouse. Welcome to the Voice of the Veteran. Before we continue with this powerful story, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. The courthouse was smaller than most expected. A 2-story brick building nestled between a faded library and a dentist's office in a quiet southern town, where people still nodded at strangers and assumed uniforms meant authority. That morning, the parking lot was already half full before the sun cleared the rooftop. Inside, reporters settled discreetly into the back rows, sensing a story yet to reveal its headline. The case was local, technically minor. A dispute turned physical at a gas station. No weapons, no blood, just a confrontation between a retired Marine and a younger man who claimed the veteran had threatened him with military violence. It should have been a routine misdemeanor. It should have been dismissed. But something in the man's silence made people uneasy. He didn't defend himself during questioning, gave no explanations, just showed up to each hearing on time, alone, wearing the same plain shirt and jeans, with a gaze that unsettled even the bailiffs. Some said he was unstable. Others said he was stubborn. An article labeled him a bitter ex-soldier with a temper. No one mentioned his record. In fact, no one had asked. Most assumed he was just another veteran who never adapted to civilian life. That's how people spoke of him in town, when they spoke. He lived alone at the edge of a wooded lot, in a trailer, no internet, no mailbox. Neighbors saw him walking at dawn, back straight, steps measured, always in the same boots, always in silence. Some thought he was odd. Others thought he was broken. But no one thought he mattered. In court, his name was printed on a piece of paper clipped to the prosecutor's folder. Daniel Riggs, 66, former U.S. Marine. That's all anyone knew. That's all they thought they needed to know. Or so they believed. The public defender assigned to him barely looked up from her notes. She had tried speaking to him before, but he hadn't offered much. No registered family, no witnesses, no alibi. Also, no anger. Just that same distant calm that made even the judge hesitate before saying his name. The bailiff escorted him in slowly, cuffs already secured, though he hadn't made any attempt to resist. He stared forward, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Not defeated, just tired. Behind the defense table, a few spectators watched him like a curiosity. A man whispered, "Isn't that the guy who yelled at a kid over a parking spot?" Another replied, "I think he threatened to shoot someone. PTSD, probably." The judge entered. The room rose. The trial began. It moved quickly. Witnesses gave vague testimony. A store clerk recalled aggressive body language. A woman said she heard him mutter something about knowing how to kill. A man in his 30s, wearing an unnecessary neck brace, told the jury he feared for his life when the old man looked at him. When asked what was said, he hesitated, then claimed, "He said he could take me out from 800 yards without blinking." The court murmured. The defense didn't object. Daniel Riggs remained still, expressionless, unmoved. The prosecutor leaned in for his closing argument with rehearsed confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, This man may have served once, but that was long ago. What we have today is someone living in the shadow of a uniform he no longer wears. Someone who thinks. His past gives him the right to intimidate. That's not heroism. That's dangerous. He let the words linger in the air. Some jurors nodded. Others looked down. The public defender didn't speak. The judge gave instructions. Deliberation was expected to be swift. The bailiffs led Riggs back to the waiting room. Cameras clicked. Whispers followed. And not a single soul in that courtroom noticed the black SUV that had just pulled up to the courthouse steps. The man inside wore a pristine uniform. His collar bore 4 silver stars, and his eyes weren't on the reporters or the cameras, but on the name stamped on the case file, Daniel Riggs. The deliberation room door clicked shut, with a hollow sound that echoed through the now silent courtroom. The jury had been out less than 3 minutes when a man in the gallery leaned toward a reporter and whispered, "Won't take long." The judge stepped down from the bench but didn't leave the room, opting instead to review notes at her desk, as if even she sensed the verdict was a formality. In the far corner, Daniel Riggs sat alone, hands resting on the table before him, fingers still, gaze steady. The cuffs had been temporarily removed, but a heavy chain still hung from his belt. He didn't look like he planned to defend himself if things went wrong, like he had accepted that people only see what they want to see. Outside the courtroom, the hallway began to fill. Someone had posted a photo of the trial online, and now local news anchors were setting up just outside the double doors. In the parking lot, veterans who had served with Riggs, men who hadn't seen him in years, were arriving quietly. Word had spread through discreet texts and unspoken bonds. They hadn't come to testify. They hadn't even been invited. They came because something about this didn't feel right. And then the SUV arrived. It pulled in without sirens, without flair. The man who stepped out wasn't a bodyguard, wasn't a politician, he was a general. General Samuel Wyatt, retired, head of Special Operations Command. Most civilians wouldn't have recognized the face, but the moment he crossed the threshold, the receptionist sat up straighter. The security officer at the metal detector didn't ask for ID. The general simply nodded once and asked, "Where's Courtroom 3?" His voice was calm, but absolute. He wasn't there to spectate. He was there with purpose. Inside, no one yet knew he was in the building. The jury hadn't returned. The judge tapped her pen lightly against the bench. The public defender aimlessly typed on a laptop, pretending to work. The prosecutor scrolled his phone, grinning smugly. And Riggs remained exactly as he had been the whole time. Expressionless, unmoved, unreadable. Not defiant, not proud, just ready. In the hallway, General Wyatt passed reporters without a word. One called out, asking if he was part of the press team. He didn't answer. Another noticed the stars on his shoulder and began recording. Wyatt paused briefly at the courtroom doors. His face, though calm, carried something weighty. Not guilt, not anger. Something more like respect mixed with urgency. He waited a moment, then opened the door and stepped inside. The judge looked up, confused at first, then immediately rose from her seat upon recognizing the insignia. The room froze. The jury was still out, but the room itself had changed. Reporters swung their cameras around. The prosecutor stood slowly, blinking like he wasn't sure if he was being pranked. Wyatt walked forward, not to the bench, not to the prosecution, but directly to the defense table, to Daniel Riggs. And Daniel finally lifted his head. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, not yet, but something had already shifted. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent. For a moment, No one breathed. The general stood still, hands clasped behind his back, before Daniel Riggs like a man about to deliver something heavier than orders. The judge, still standing, cleared her throat gently. "General, may I ask what brings you here today?" Wyatt didn't answer immediately. He looked at Riggs, then turned to the room. His voice was quiet, clear, and unwavering. "I'm here because the man sitting before you is the reason I'm alive. He doesn't know I came today. He didn't ask me to. In fact, he probably hoped I wouldn't. But I heard about this trial and couldn't stay silent." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The reporters leaned in. A juror returning from the hallway froze at the door, sensing they had stepped into something far bigger than the case file in their hands. Wyatt stepped toward the bench, not to impose, but to be heard. 31 years ago, I was pinned behind a crumbling wall outside Fallujah. My unit was scattered. Comms were down. 2 wounded. No evacuation. We were surrounded. And then, out of nowhere, a sniper opened a path. He didn't speak, didn't wait for thanks. He just fired. 12 confirmed hostiles down in under 5 minutes, each shot placed with surgical precision. The last through a rooftop hatch at 936 yards. Moving target. Crosswind. He paused, scanning the room. That sniper was Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Riggs. Murmurs rose in the room, but Wyatt lifted a hand, and the room fell silent again. "I've read the testimony. I've seen the charges. And I tell you now, whatever words this man allegedly said in a parking lot, he's earned the right to be heard in a way none of you can measure. He doesn't talk much. Never did. He didn't come back from war asking for parades or medals. But if you think for a second that the man sitting here is a threat to anyone, you don't know what restraint looks like." He turned to the judge. "With your permission, I'd like to speak to the jury." The judge, stunned, nodded slowly. "Proceed." General Wyatt walked to the front of the jury box and took a breath. There's a reason Daniel Riggs didn't defend himself. Not because he's guilty, but because he's tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of watching the world confuse silence with threat. But I know him. I know that when chaos erupts, when bullets fly, when no one knows what to do, you pray a man like him is near. He stepped back, then added softly, "Men like him aren't meant to be chained. They belong in history books." Then, before the court, reporters, judge, jury, and the man who once saved his life, the general did something no one expected. He knelt on one knee. Not from weakness, not for show, but as an apology. Not for himself, but for a system that had forgotten who Daniel Riggs was. No one moved. Not the bailiff, not the prosecutor, not even the judge, who remained frozen behind her bench, one hand still on her gavel, the other covering her mouth. The jury, now back in their seats, stared at the 4-star general kneeling before the man they were about to convict. One juror wiped away a tear. Another lowered their gaze in shame. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but no words came out. Daniel Riggs didn't react immediately. Didn't look around for validation. Didn't show surprise. His gaze stayed fixed on the man kneeling before him, eyes filled with a lifetime of things never said. Finally, after what felt like eternity, he rose from his seat, walked to the general, and extended his hand. Wyatt stood, took it, and in that moment the 2 men stood face to face, not as officer and sniper, not as witness and accused, but as something older, deeper, as soldiers bound by something the rest of the room would never fully understand. The judge cleared her throat, her voice cracking slightly. "In light of this testimony and the extraordinary context presented to this court, I hereby dismiss all charges with immediate effect. Her gavel fell, not with force, but with finality. The chains were removed from Daniel. This time, no one touched him without reverence. He didn't rush out. He turned, nodded once to the jury, and walked slowly down the aisle, each step echoing through the wood-paneled chamber like the punctuation to a long-overdue sentence. Outside, veterans saluted as he passed. One raised a hand unprompted. Reporters tried to speak, but no question made sense anymore. Riggs kept walking, didn't say a word. He never needed to. General Wyatt followed, not as escort, but as witness. And as they stepped into the sunlight for the first time in years, Daniel Riggs looked less like a ghost and more like a man returning from a war that had never truly ended. Sometimes a hero no longer wears a uniform, doesn't march, doesn't salute, doesn't attend ceremonies. Sometimes he walks into a courtroom with a calm gaze and worn boots, not asking for recognition, just hoping the world stops misreading the silence he's carried for decades. Daniel Riggs never asked to be defended, never told his story. He didn't need to, because there are men like him who believe doing the right thing shouldn't require applause, who carry their scars privately, their memories silently, and their honor with a weight most will never recognize until it's too late. But not this time, because this time someone spoke. This time someone remembered. This time a man with 4 stars on his shoulder knelt in a courtroom, not to plead, but to correct something we too often get wrong, forgetting what sacrifice looks like when the war is over, forgetting that those who saved lives abroad are still trying to survive here, forgetting that silence isn't weakness, it's strength too deep for words. Daniel Riggs didn't leave that courtroom vindicated. He left unchanged, because he never needed a verdict to tell him who he was. But for once, the world stopped long enough to see him. And maybe that's the lesson we're meant to carry. Not to wait for medals or ceremonies, but to recognize greatness while it still walks, quietly among us.